Hey. Um, so I'm going to talk a little bit about Kubernetes. That's why we're here. We're at KCD, right? I'm Stephen Augustus, head of open source at Cisco. And I do a few things for the Kubernetes project. I'm part of the steering committee. I am one of the co-chairs for SIG Release, and I'm also one of the co-founders of the release engineering subproject and a senior release manager. If you want to find out more, whois.augie.dev. So who we are, SIG Release, if you don't know what SIGs are special interest groups within Kubernetes. The community has a set of governance groups, and there are committees, there are special interest groups, subprojects, working groups across Kubernetes. So the special interest group for release has a few chairs and technical leads. Myself, Sasha at Red Hat, Jeremy at Microsoft. Technical leads include Veronica, Carlos, and Adolfo at Offset, ChainGuard, and StackLock, respectively. And here's what we do. Kind of as the name implies, SIG Release is responsible for making sure that Kubernetes goes out on time and is of high quality. If you didn't know, fun fact, Kubernetes is the largest Golang-based open source project on the internet. I don't know what people are carrying around on USB sticks or handling internally, but on the internet, Kubernetes is the largest Golang-based one. So I think there's a common misconception with SIG Release and getting involved in SIG Release that the release team is SIG Release, and that is not true. SIG Release is composed of a set of subprojects. For Kubernetes, the definition of a subproject is basically that subprojects hold code, right? So they are containers that can hold code or hold some function within a special interest group, right? So the release team is merely one of those containers within SIG Release. The actual subprojects. So again, we've got the release team. It's very shiny. That's kind of what people view it as. And then you've got release engineering, and it's a bit more in the weeds. So I will say that I borrowed this deck from the team. They delivered a longer version of this talk at KubeCon in Paris. So if you want to check that one out, I will provide links later. So who we are now. Now that you know about the subprojects, we recently introduced subproject leads. Very excited because all of the people who are on this list have spent, I personally have spent 5+ years in the special interest group. The folks who are on this list as subproject leads, Grace, Kat, and Marco, have spent years on the release team at this point and years in release engineering efforts across Kubernetes. So very excited now that we have this subproject lead role to recognize their work officially. So hats off to them. Now, SIG Release in 2024. We decided to work on a roadmap, which is great and good, and every project should do this. What we basically wanted to do is kind of, again, as the SIG's name implies, make sure that we're releasing quality Kubernetes. We wanted to take a focus between 2023 and 2024 on making sure that Kubernetes was more robust, safe, fast, reliable, and flexible, right? And what do those mean? I kind of put them up on the screen. You can check out the roadmap if you want to. It's git.k8.io. Fun fact, if you're ever looking for any repository within Kubernetes, if you git.k8.io/repository name, it'll redirect to the correct one. So our roadmap is in the SIG Release repository, and we're looking at making sure that releases are more robust. If you have ever worked with Kubernetes in the past and seen the release engineering tooling, it started off as a bash script, probably not super surprising here. Anybody use bash? Yeah, maybe one or two people, right? Yeah. So this is a bash script that was created by some of the original release engineers within Kubernetes. And that bash script grew to be very, very interesting. It was roughly 5,000 lines before I decided to destroy it. And that was 5,000 lines spread across multiple libraries. It was very, very interesting that we were not using a more robust programming language for releasing Kubernetes. Again, one of the largest Golang-based projects on the internet. So we're no longer doing that, but even still, moving to a Golang-based releaser, we were experiencing lots of infrastructure failures. So runs that would make certain assumptions on variables or state of the job at point in time. And we have been working across the last year and a half or so to make that a bit more robust, right? We want them to be fast. These jobs ran serially, and we would release multiple releases of Kubernetes at a time. During patch release cycles, that means we were releasing 3 to 4 Kubernetes releases that day, which meant you were waiting for each of them to complete. Very exciting time. Our release managers group within the release engineering subproject is kind of spread across. It's very much follow the sun. So we'd have folks that were in Asia Pacific or EMEA. They would kick off the release, and it would slowly rotate to US East and then US West, and we'd eventually release. We don't do that anymore. We can basically release a lot faster than we used to. Very exciting. We also want to make sure that moving forward, that any of our processes are flexible. Flexible in the sense that any new tool that we come up with should allow us to integrate with existing tooling, new tooling, and we should take those considerations to heart from the beginning of the process. So not let's cobble 50 more lines into the bash script and see where we get. It's let's make sure this is going to work for the next N years, right? So again, you can check out the roadmap, roadmap.md, and the SIG Release repo. So let's talk about Kubernetes. The most recent release of Kubernetes, v130, is Kubernetes. That is Kat, one of the most recent subproject leads, her Cat Espresso. And the art is done by Kefi Moji. So the release team subproject, again, we've got release engineering and the release team. We try to improve the release team subproject every cycle. My internal feeling for the release team is that it should not exist. The release team is, I call affectionately, anyone who runs the release team lead is the chief cat herder for the Kubernetes project for that cycle. Now, the cycle will take roughly, it used to be quarterly, now it's roughly 4 months, right? Now, the release team is responsible for basically pinging across 30 plus SIGs within the project to make sure that they get their stuff done on time. And ultimately, that should not be a role that exists, right? And we've got a bunch of subteams within the release team. We've got the release lead. We've got an emeritus advisor who is someone who has experience being on the release team for a few years. We've got release signal. We've got docs, the release notes team, communications. So they work with the CNCF to make sure we're doing the webinars and we're doing the blog posts and all that fun stuff, and bug triage, right? Now, the release engineering subproject was spawned off of the release team. There used to be a branch manager and a patch manager. And the patch manager was responsible for carrying the Kubernetes releases till the end of that release. So that might have been a year and change for one person to be doing that. We don't do that anymore. We created an entire team of now 14 or so people responsible for that, and it works a lot better. So we recently, so again, my belief is that we want to delete as many roles from the release team as possible, and hopefully even maybe get rid of the release team eventually, right? But right now, the release team acts as a really interesting opportunity for people to get involved in the project. It is an opportunity that people flock to. And I have to say that it is one of the most difficult things to do in the project. So people that join the release team as their first entry point to the project, that is walking straight into the fire. So congrats to anyone who has joined Kubernetes by starting in the release team. It's not an easy thing to do. So we do recognize that the release team is an opportunity for contributions, and we don't want to entirely shut that down, but we do want to optimize the way that the release team works over time, right? So one of the ways that we've recently done that is we've combined the bug triage and the CI signal role into a release signal role. Lots of overlap between the two teams outside of watching for all of the issues and PRs that are floating through the Kubernetes repo and adjacent repos. They're also watching TestGrid. If you're familiar with TestGrid basically monitors all of the jobs that are running across the Kubernetes project, right? Jobs that are running in Prow, jobs that may be reporting status out from GitHub Actions, but that is one of the teams that watches for green signal across those jobs before we kick off a Kubernetes release. Documentation. Who likes documentation here? Anybody? Yeah, docs people. All right. So documentation is one of the most important things that you can do in an open source project, right? For the Kubernetes project, if you are releasing an enhancement, documentation is non-negotiable. It is a requirement for an enhancement, and we will block a release on documentation. So we introduced more deadlines and stuff. The docs freeze. So the docs freeze allows a bit more signal coming into the release docs subteam and SIG docs. We work in very close partnership with SIG docs, and most of that work happens at the tail end of the cycle. So if things are going badly with docs, there's a very strong possibility that we may have a delayed release. So over time, we were trying to improve that. We've noticed over the last 3 release cycles, we've either had interesting shenanigans happen with either docs or the comms. So we want to make sure that moving forward, everyone in the community is aware that we will actually block releases without having docs in place. So let's talk a little bit about the roadmap. You wanted to know what was happening in 2024 and why I'm here, how we're going to do a little to make Kubernetes releases more robust. We're going to be focusing on artifact validation. We want to make sure that debs and RPMs, which are for a lot of internal folks, the primary mechanism of consumption for Kubernetes releases, we want to make sure that those are more robust. We want to migrate away from a GCS bucket that was maintained by Google up until very recently. For those who are not familiar, I opened an issue maybe in 2017, 2018 about this bucket, and we only recently closed that issue. So the way that Kubernetes releases work would be we click a button, or we click a few different buttons, do some credential logins. Things happen within Google Cloud Platform, and eventually we get to a step where we would have to reach out to someone who worked at Google. We'd have to reach out to someone who worked at Google because they would have to sign the packages and then use a tool called Rapture to rapture those packages up into the package repository that was backed by GS Kubernetes-release. So that means that all Kubernetes releases at some point in time were dependent on having a Googler go, yes, that's cool, I will push these artifacts now. I'm not going to go into the details of how exactly those artifact pushes happen, but trust me, it was terrifying. And as the people who were responsible for that part of the project were shifted to different responsibilities internally, we lost our ability to. It was a huge bust factor, huge bust factor for the project. So that was one of our primary concerns. We want to move onto community-based infrastructure so that anyone can release Kubernetes. Anyone can sign the packages, build the packages, sign the packages, make them available to the community. So how did we do that? We got some help from our friends at OpenSUSE. So Open Build Service, if you have not heard of Open Build Service, or OBS, it is used by quite a few Linux distributions. They have spent some time learning how to properly handle security and do things like GPG keys, which we've been trying to figure out in the, I think, building a web of trust within an open source project is always fun. and very easy to do. There's a reliability factor, knowing that we do not have to fully maintain the infrastructure, and there is some offload into a well-trusted service. And also, they offered to sponsor the project and help us shift over to open build service. So hats off to OpenSUSE for that. The Kubernetes project no longer uses that very scary bucket, and now uses open build service on community-hosted infrastructure. So if you ever want to check that out, that is pkgs.kates.io. And I don't know if you can see that very well, but some very easy things to add into your apt lists. Or if you're trying to do that on, trying to grab the key rings, here's how you do it. There's also a QR code. I'll leave that up for a hot second. Cool. All right. What else did we do recently? We also created a bunch of GitHub Actions. We realized that we were using GitHub Actions quite a bit for our release engineering projects, and we figured that it would be cool if we made them available to other people to use. So if you're concerned about provenance within your projects, generating SBOMs, checking your dependencies, publishing releases, publishing release notes, we use these tools, these GitHub workflows, for all of the projects within our release engineering subproject. And you're like, all the projects? What do you mean all the projects? All of the projects. So we have a few projects that we maintain within the release engineering team, and those are that may not even be the full list. Those are some of the projects that we maintain, and those are all using those GitHub Actions for release workflows, provenance, SBOM generation, etc. So what's coming soon for the security inclined folks? Sometimes we have security vulnerabilities within Kubernetes, and it's important to figure out how to properly communicate those in ways that are consumable to the public. So across our release notes, across VEX statements, across SBOMs within the various projects in the Kubernetes ecosystem, in partnership with the Security Response Committee. So I mentioned committees before. Our Security Response Committee is responsible for security response within the community. We have 3 committees: the Steering Committee, the Security Response Committee, and the Code of Conduct Committee. This team of folks is responsible for ensuring that we patch vulnerabilities and we communicate them safely and responsibly to the people who are consuming Kubernetes. Moving forward, we will continue to have those folks, but we're going to add some more fancy automation into the process, right? So between, again, release notes, VEX, SBOM, and integrations with OSV, we'll be able to do a bit better in reporting on status and having people be able to dial into some of those security feeds moving forward. But for us to be able to do that, we need you. We need you to make the magic happen, right? Julie had mentioned this is a project. These are projects where people can show up and do the work, get the credit, and have great conversations with people. SIG Release is one of those projects, and I would deeply encourage you to come hang out with us if you want to know more about SIG Release. We have weekly calls on Tuesdays. If you want to know more, we have Kubernetes/SIG-release is our repo on GitHub, and that has more information about all of our sub-projects, how to get in contact with us, including Slack, the main repository, release engineering sub-projects. So, thank you.